Welcome to We Chat Divorce, hosted by Karen Shalou, Legal Liaison, and Katherine Shanahan, CDFA. Each episode, we sit down with divorce professionals and industry experts to provide insights and frank discussions about real people, real situations, and real divorce to help you achieve your best life post-divorce. This episode of We Chat Divorce is brought to you by My Divorce Solution, offering divorce financial planning so clients can secure the divorce settlement they deserve. Visit mydivorcesolution.com to request access.
Welcome to We Chat Divorce. Katherine and I will be discussing parenting plans and finances, building a blueprint for co-parenting success with expert legal insights from Nicole Kobis, attorney.
Well, before we invite her in, this is a very interesting conversation, right? Because we all are parenting experts when we're parents, right? So I know you had a different experience than I did when you got your divorce, because my kids were older. You know, I can't imagine what it was like having them younger.
Yeah, it was really difficult. And I was one of those parents who just presumed that I was the main caregiver, right? The main nurturer, for lack of a better word. And so the courts would just, give me most of the time. I would have latitude. And I worked in a law office. I cannot even say that enough. I just presumed so many things and was, heard. But when you get in the court system, it's just so different. And, I fought for everything that I always felt was right for them. But at the end of the day, the courts see it as a shared relationship, fairly sterile, unless, your spouse demonstrates that they're a felon or they, would be harmful to the children. So, yeah, it was difficult and expensive by the time I figured it out.
You what?
I said it and expensive by the time I figured it out.
Yeah. So I have a little different insight because, my kids were older. So I didn't really have a parenting plan. We didn't put one in place and it worked out fine. I still took care of mostly everything and he took care of mostly every expense and that worked out. But I do have the experience during my 20-year marriage of raising 3 stepchildren. And I can't tell you, it's just coming to me right now, Karen, as we're talking about this, how many times I actually read his divorce decree, what the parenting time was, because either she was late or she didn't leave the clothes that I sent them, that she didn't send them back the clothes, or they wanted to stay longer and she didn't want them to stay longer. And, the summers, we had a pool, they wanted to be there longer. And, I just as a logical thinker thought, sure, it's fine. Well, that's not the agreement. This is what the agreement is. And Christmas, we always got them at 1:00. So then when I had children, I couldn't go see my family. I had to be home by 1:00. On Christmas Day, which ended up being fine. I just treated them like they were my children as well when they were with me, which I think is really hard if you're a stepmom out there and you're listening to this. I know, looking at the parenting plan that your new husband put together with his ex-wife is probably something you should read before you get married to make sure you can keep that in force.
Idea.
I didn't know that because I didn't know anything about divorce. I didn't come from a divorced family. And I just loved these 3 little girls. And I would just think that. But I got mad so many times. And I got mad at my husband at that time, which I shouldn't have gotten mad at him because it was an agreement that was set up. I should have known to read that agreement and say, am I buying into this? Can I do this? And why not do that? If you're getting married to someone or you're married to someone, you haven't read their agreement, I think you should have trust enough to do that. And it kind of feeds into what we even do. Where's the symmetry of information with your finances? So, divorce and marriage is about kids and finances most of the time. So have that symmetry of information before you commit yourself to something that you just might not be able to handle.
Yeah. Or not agree to, right? Because the kids are the ones that are, I say, holding the bag. We went through that often, what they didn't show up for their sports activities or school activities because the stepmom believed that on their time they had a specific schedule and she would do crafts and things with them. But, she also believed they should be doing chores and all these things. And she did not sign up for what we had negotiated, relative to their music lessons, anything like that. It just, well, we forgot, or we don't have time to, whatever it was. And then, when you try to enforce that agreement, it's expensive and it's really not enforceable at the end of the day. It's not something, even if there's another order, still not going to do it.
Right. And by the time you get another order, forget it. The kids could be a year older.
Yeah.
And the
And
problem's
things
gone.
change. Yeah.
Mhm.
And the kids are in the mix of that dispute. It's not healthy. It's not good. So,
Right. I totally agree. It
yeah.
is all about the kids. So I am looking forward to today's discussion. Let's give her the benefit of the doubt of getting some good tips on parenting plans moving forward. And you know what? If you're listening, there's another topic you want us to cover. Please reach out to us and we'll discuss that. Send your comments to wechat@ck11.net and we'll put that email in the show notes.
So now let's welcome our guests so we can really get into this important topic. And now we'd like to welcome attorney Nicole Kobis to our podcast. Welcome, Nicole.
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
We're so glad to have you and looking forward to our conversation today. Today, we're going to talk about parenting plans and finances, building a blueprint for co-parenting success. I know every parent going through the divorce process wants this. So in this episode, we're going to be discussing how to balance custody, communication, and cost with legal expert insights from attorney Kobis. But first, let me take a couple minutes to introduce Nicole. Nicole is a partner and divorce family law attorney at Lindabury, McCormick, Estabrook, and Cooper.
You got them all.
Awesome. In Westfield, New Jersey. Nicole dedicates her practice to the area of matrimonial law and advises clients on matters involving divorce, custody, spousal support, child support, equitable distribution, and domestic violence. She's also an accredited New Jersey family and divorce mediator and is skilled at working with divorcing parties so that they can achieve amicable resolutions. Nicole is also an approved New Jersey parent coordinator who helps parents implement a parenting plan and resolve day-to-day parenting issues.
Yeah, that sounds really hopeful. I love the implementation, but how do you get the execution?
It's always tricky, right? That's why you call in the experts. You hopefully work together, keeping in mind, the children's best interests. And you hope at the heart of it, even though you might not want to be married anymore, you're still going to be parents forever. And hopefully if you kind of keep that in the forefront, people behave and act accordingly. Wishful thinking sometimes, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's true. And I just want to make sure we do incorporate this parenting coordinator. I think that's a relatively new term in the last couple of years. So I just want to make sure we cover that. But before we dive into our topic, Nicole, can you share with our audience a bit about your story of how your life experiences have brought you to do the work you do today?
Sure. So I have been a lawyer now for over a decade. This is the second career for me. I went to college for public relations and marketing, and I had an incredible career in the fashion industry, actually, doing international marketing for a large multinational brand, meeting celebrities, planning parties, planning fashion week. I look back on it, it was an incredible career, but I knew I always wanted to help people and I wanted to do more. And studied for my LSAT. And I remember telling my boyfriend at the time, now my husband, that I was going to go to law school and I was going to leave this job. And he's like, okay. He's like, here we go. And I've never looked back. And I was fortunate that throughout law school, I had incredible internships and opportunities and fell in love with family law. I always knew that I wanted to be client facing. I didn't want to be in an office pushing papers. I didn't want to deal with corporations. I wanted to deal with people. And I was very lucky to get a clerkship for the presiding judge of the family division in one of the counties in New Jersey. And then from there, got recruited to the firm that I'm still at now. I was the family law associate, became partner, and then was elevated now to equity partner. So I really like making an impact in people's lives and making a difference and being, supportive of them, and especially in an incredibly not only trying time, but a time that people don't expect to be in. You don't get married thinking you're going to get divorced. And I think that's kind of the key that, if people thought that, then chances are they wouldn't get married. So, it's taken a lot to get here and a lot to also own who I am and the kind of lawyer that I am and the way that I want to help clients. And, it's really staying true to myself and the way that I see things and the way that I hopefully help people not only get through such a hard part in their life, but also then start the next chapter of their lives on better footing with resources and things like that.
Wow, that's remarkable.
Yeah, kind of did a 180. That's for sure. But I'm glad when I look back on 21-year-old Nicole. I didn't want to go to law school then. I wanted to work. I needed to have those experiences. I don't think I could have done another 3 more years of school right after coming off of a 4-year degree. And I went to college in Washington D.C. I got to experience great things there, and all those opportunities. I'm still in touch with so many people from my former life, but I find it really fulfilling now to be able to connect with clients and give them the right resources and tools. And nothing is more rewarding than you hear from a client several years down the road saying, "You'll never believe this. My first grandchild was born. Here's a picture. You'll never believe this. I just met someone. We're going to get married. Can you do a prenup for me?" And you're just like, wow, like these are the people, you remember them crying in your office. And it's so nice when you get to see them restart and, celebrate, positive and, memorable milestones in their lives.
Well, you have fantastic energy, and that's great to hear,
Oh,
especially when it comes
thanks.
to the parenting, co-parenting plan, because I'm sure you need energy for that.
Yeah, parenting time is always the hardest to deal with in any case. Money is money. You figure out how much, you're going to pay, how much you're going to receive, how the assets get divided, but you're dividing your children, who are the most precious things in your life, is really hard. And it is not common that people agree automatically. That's the rarities, because the reality is most people want 100% of time with their kids, right? They didn't sign up to be a part-time parent. And I think that's often, the hardest of trying to step out of, your often like hatred for your spouse at the time and say, okay, but they are a good mother or father. They might not be a good husband, wife, but they still can be a really good parent. And that's, that's difficult. And the sooner that people are able to come around to that, often the better and more productive the conversations are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to go into some of that for a variety of reasons, but let's just start at what are the essential elements of a parenting plan? Let's just start there. Like, can you lay out what that outline is?
Sure. So a parenting plan consists of first the legal custody, right? Whether it's going to be joint custody, whether it's going to be sole custody, which is the legal decision making authority over your minor children. And then it's the time sharing, how much time each person is going to be spending with the child or children and on what schedule. Then from there, you flow down to how are you going to share holidays, which might be different than, regular time sharing. Sometimes, depending on the family, you might have different time sharing in the summer, for example, than you have during the school year. You have also how are you going to vacation? Is each parent going to be entitled to a certain amount of vacation per year? How are you going to decide who's vacationing where? What's appropriate? Are kids getting pulled out of school? Things like that. Those are kind of like the main topics. And then obviously, depending on the family, there's sometimes, more nuanced things. For example, one of the things that we deal with a lot, especially with like healthcare industry employees, is they don't often know their schedule and they have a rotating schedule. So you can't have a regular and reoccurring parenting time schedule because they don't work the same days and they don't work the same times. So it has to be more free flowing. There's other industries where they work different schedules depending on the season. And how, you incorporate that, and what do you do when, let's say, maybe someone works an overnight shift? And, it's not necessarily fair to the parent who doesn't work overnight that they get all of the overnights with the kids, but then who's going to stay with them and how does that get factored in? So every case has the same core elements, but definitely the way you look at them could be varied depending on the facts.
I think
Yeah.
that's the hard part for a lot of people. If you're listening and you're saying, "Oh, sure, my ex, soon to be ex, doesn't want to spend any time with the kids now, or he's off and doing that. And now he all of a sudden wants all these overnight stays. And I'm the one that gets up with them and I'm the one that takes care of them. So why is he going to get that?" That's a hard pill to swallow.
It is. And, I would say very generally in most marriages, successful or not, there's division of labor and not every spouse does every task. So there might be one parent who has never made a lunch in their lives. And there might be another parent who doesn't even know what activities are on what days because they're at work. And another parent is either doing all the shuttling back and forth or is arranging for all the shuttling back and forth. And as hard as it is to say, that other parent has to learn. And yes, they might not cut the sandwich the way that the kids are used to. They might not pack the snacks the way that the kids are used to. But if they want the time with the children and it's safe and it's appropriate and it's in the children's best interest, they get that time. And, often I have to give advice that I might necessarily not personally want to give, but I know that's what the law provides. And yes, that might mean that things are a little hard at first and the transitions are harder and there's adjustments for the kids. And I will not use this expression, but everyone says kids are resilient. And it is one of my least favorite expressions in this entire, I guess, industry. But the reality is everyone has to adjust. And that period of adjustment is harder for some.
Do you think that a lot of people want to take more overnights because it affects their child support payment?
I don't want to admit that the answer is probably yes, because I want to believe that you're wanting time with your children because you want time with your children. But yes, once you hit certain milestones in terms of the number of overnights, you get a significant decrease in your child support. Granted, you then are also in theory paying more for your children because you are also you're spending more time with them. But for some people, it probably is driven by finances.
And can you go back if all of a sudden they said they're going to have them 50% of the time, but they don't, they get them 10% of the time and get your support modified?
Sure. So custody and parenting time is always modifiable, as is support. But the hurdles that you have to jump over and the things that you have to prove in order to have it modified is often larger because, especially in New Jersey, the law views it that people are allowed finality and allowed to plan. So once you've entered into an agreement and you have finality, the law does make it more difficult to change that.
Hmm.
Is that kind of under the term of precedence or consistency, what the children are accustomed to by then?
Well, that's also part of it too, is that, you enter into whatever parenting time you're going to enter into. And so long as it's working, it's going to stay in place. Obviously, if two people can come to an agreement and say, this isn't working for us, you can change whatever you want. I always tell clients that whatever's on paper is kind of your fallback. You can feel free to privately call each other and say, hey, I have a family wedding this weekend. Can I have the kid? Of course you can. There's no divorce police that comes after you to make sure you're following the terms of it. But absent an agreement otherwise, you are locked into what is in this document. So, and kids, no matter who they are, they do thrive on consistency. They thrive on expectations. They thrive on knowing what's going on. And, to the best that you can, give your children that consistency so that they know, okay, on Wednesday, I'm going to be with mom. So if I want to have a play date on Wednesday, I need to ask mom if I can have that play date. You don't want your children to be in a position that they don't know where they're sleeping at night either. And that it's constantly, ping-ponging back and forth and they don't know which end is up, that it affects academics, it affects emotions, even if they're not outwardly showing it, adults, we like consistency too. No one likes constant change and are able to thrive well in that. You want to have that stability in everyone's lives.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to go back to something that you said though. You said, have this agreement to fall back. There's no divorce police. And that, if you're listening, and we hear this a lot, oh, we're just going to do what's best for the kids. We don't really need the parenting agreement really. No, we promise we're going to do this. We promise we're going to do that. And I'm always like, well, just get it in writing. And if you two don't want to follow it, fine, but you need something to fall back on.
Yeah, not having an agreement is always dangerous because yes, you hope that everything is hunky dory and everyone still gets along. They sit together at the soccer games and things like that. But for most people, that's not the usual path that they take. And there is some animosity. There is some, distrust, and there is some tumult that is put into the process when you get divorced. So to the extent that you're able to button everything up, it's always better because at least everyone has a level of expectation that needs to be followed. And often, again, another general statement, everything is great usually until one spouse moves on with someone else. And then now you're dealing with potentially another set of family that, and another spouse that has other children with someone else and the dynamics of that. And what if, do you want those weekends to line up so the kids are all together? Do you want the weekends not to line up so you don't have all the kids? And where is everyone sleeping? And is there enough space? Are people moving? Life changes. And to the extent that you're able to at least give finality to your family and to have to modify things maybe accordingly, you need to have a place to start.
Oh my goodness, 100%. I had to learn that lesson the hard way, the $40,000 way. My kids were really young, and I believed that I was the best suited parent, right? Because I did everything and my spouse didn't. But I had to learn at the end of the day, and to your point, Nicole and Catherine, that the spouses are going to be awarded time if it's considered appropriate. And most of the time it is. And then if they're at, even if the spouse isn't caretaking and they're at their grandparents, that's still going to be okay. And then if they're not taking them to their activities and you don't have something in place, that just means another court fight. And it took me a long time to come to terms with that. There was even a situation where my daughter needed to get picked up, and I think it was her dad's parenting time, but the school was closer to me, but they wouldn't let her come with me because the custody order didn't provide for it. So
Oh,
to
boy.
your point, there's so many dynamics that if they're locked down, because someone else probably will come into the picture and reframe your ex's expectations and goals for the family when they're at that household. I swear I learned the hard way. And if I could go back and do it, I would take everything you're saying at face value and adopt it because it is accurate.
And it's really hard sometimes because it's such an emotionally charged time in your life. So to say that people are thinking clearly and are going to make the best decisions, I think is foolish because we all know that, when we're emotional and when, our life is being turned upside down on a path that we didn't want, we can't be making the best decisions. And what might be good for children who are, let's say, 3 and 5 isn't going to be great for the same children when they're 13 and 15, right?
Mhm.
And that's often hard too, because these documents, you want them to be living, but if you're not going to be able to work with your co-parent, you're going to be stuck at whatever was good for 3 and 5 and have to figure out how to apply that to 13 and 15, which is
Mhm.
also hard. I tell the example of Christmas morning is always a thing, right? A lot of times if you get divorced and your children are young, that is like, the seminal time, right? No one wants to give that up. And that sometimes completely changes everyone's holidays, right? Because there's one day, right? It's one of the few holidays where it is one day, and how you share that time and the new memories that you make and the new traditions that you make. And yes, there are some cases where people agree, we're going to do Christmas morning together. Forget about the new girlfriend, forget about the new boyfriend. Like, we are going to come together and we are going to do this. But that takes, swallowing people's pride, putting aside their feelings, and, putting on a good front for the kids, which, I tell my clients all the time, regardless of how you might feel about this person, you want to be able to, on high school graduation, take that family picture, right? At the weddings, you want to be able to pose for those pictures. And yes, do you have to just exchange more than pleasantries? No. But we need to get to a point where that's okay. And for your kids, that feels good.
That's a problem. If you say we're going to meet every Christmas morning, and then you guys talked about, when you're 3, it's different than when you're 13. So
Yeah.
if you have that written in your agreement, 10 years later, you still have to do that. Well, that would be, see, I'm a little different because my children were older. So, although their dad came on Christmas Eve to open his gifts to them at our house, I would imagine that would be a really hard thing to have a 3-year-old that you have to say that the parents have to get together every Christmas morning 10 years later when they're probably moved on with other relationships and other kids, maybe even.
Well, and that's the thing, and that's what's hard is that, you get divorced when you get divorced, and under the facts present at that time, you don't know what life is going to hold for you. It's no different than if their jobs transfer them and then they have to move out of state. And then what are you doing with parenting time? Are you clearly something has to change if you were once living close together? Things happen in people's lives. And unfortunately, even though you might not be a united family anymore, you still are some semblance of a family if you're sharing children together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is really great when it matters how you go through this process so you can establish some kind of common ground.
And
Exactly,
thank
because
you
you
for
have,
that.
regardless of how old your kids are, you still have major milestones. Even if you get divorced when your children are 30, if your children have kids, then you've shared grandchildren. It's really hard to get away from each other once you have children together.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Do you believe, I found this true in my case, that as the kids grew older, they had more latitude to modify their visitations with either parent. They were acknowledged by the court system more once they
That is
turned 13,
definitely true.
14.
Yes, that is definitely true that the children do play some semblance of a role as they get older. But you also hope too that, at certain ages, it is appropriate for your children to want to spend more time with their friends and necessarily be home with, mom or dad, right? And what's hard is that when mom or dad, because they have less time with them, are like, no, you're not going to your friend's house. I want to have dinner with you tonight, and how to navigate that when it's, arguably appropriate for your children to necessarily like, want to hang out with their friends and go to social events. And a lot of times those happen on the weekends. And, unfortunately, you sometimes get parents who, nope, this is what the agreement says. This is what we're agreeing to. You're not going. And does that cause resentment? Sure. Does that cause problems? Absolutely. Does it cause an issue of, well, when I'm at dad's house, dad lets me do X, Y, and Z, And so even though you're in two households, you still want to have some commonality so that there is a level of respect and rules that are followed still in both households. The example of, especially now, which I am dreading when I have to be a parent, to my daughter, but social media and cell phones. And, dad lets me charge my phone in my room at night. Mom makes me leave it in the kitchen. Well, that, things like that are even more nuanced for this generation coming up. But it's so important to have a united front for your kids, because if not, the kid's just going to play one off of the other. And then
Yeah.
that's just going to create more hostility that's just not necessary. And there's
Yeah.
certain things too that I'll say to clients, you would have had this issue if you were married. You're two different
I was
people,
just going to say that.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
not everything can be blamed on the fact that you're
Mhm.
divorced. Like, there are definitely things that you just approach life differently. And there's
Mhm.
no difference. Like, you have to figure it out. And yes, it's probably easier when you're married because you still have a vested interest in being together, but you still need to figure it out and do what's in your children's best interests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that comes up often for us and our clients, because again, there's typically one parent that is the social extracurricular activity director, right? And it always has been. And maybe the other parent agreed or didn't agree. For me, I was that person because I thought, their personal development was important, but my spouse didn't necessarily agree. There's financial obligations associated with that. And I feel like even now, on a much larger scale, a lot of these kids have international trips or national trips that have to be accommodated for in their competitions. And so typically the higher wage earning spouse can accommodate that better than the one receiving support. So we come upon these issues where how the children will participate is somewhat agreed upon. But if the spouse receiving support doesn't have enough money to travel from New Jersey to California to see the competition, they can't participate. So, how do the courts look at those situations? Because I think they're just more and more now.
It's really hard because these activities and these sports, gone are the days of people just doing rec sports, right? That doesn't, by the time, my daughter's 8, and I felt like by the time she was 7, like she had to choose a path, or if not, the gap between an average rec player and these, competitors gets larger and larger. You can't ever catch up. And I think courts deal with it based on how much money is there, what the kids have been accustomed to. And in fairness, both parents have a right to be there, right? And how that's going to get funded, it really depends on how much money there is. I've seen cases where they've split in some fashion the hotel, the airfare, and the competition fees or the registration fees, whatever, in some kind of pro rata share based on incomes. And then the higher earning spouse might have to kick in a little more money for the parent who is taking the child. Because a lot of times when you're gone on these trips, both parents don't go necessarily the entire time, right? There's usually multiple children. So someone has to stay home with the other children. And you don't necessarily, if you go to these competitions, you might only participate 1 or 2 days, yet you have to be there for 6. And then it's on top of that, what, comes along with that, it's the meals, it's the transportation. It's not just, you're going to go watch 3 games and you're going to sit in your hotel room the rest of the time, whether you're ordering room service, whether you're going out for food, whether you're grocery shopping, all this costs money. And no one wants to say no to their kids, especially if they've, let's say, played a sport for years and years and years. You're getting divorced when your kids are, let's say, teenagers. But it's all based on the court is not going to necessarily just find money that doesn't exist. So then you have to strike that, even if court says, no, I'm not going to make them pay for this. But then you're both like, but we want him to participate. And then it's like, okay, well, where is the money coming from? And you often see a lot of credit card debt. You often see people living way beyond their means. And fortunately, some of these programs do have some financial assistance and coaches chip in and things like that. But it's a problem. It's a really big problem, because a lot of times the cost of living in areas cannot be supported by 2 people working to keep one household together, let alone keep 2 households together operating in the same budgets.
That's so true. So when planning for the future, I'd like to go back to the beginning of our conversation where you talked about a parenting coordinator. I believe that is a role of a parenting coordinator to kind of liaise and navigate beyond the original parenting plan. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I love acting in a parent coordinator role. So a parenting coordinator comes into play after a parenting time plan is in place. So like that is the key. We need to start with something. And parenting coordinators are given as much latitude as the couple allows. And there is an order and a retainer agreement that provide for exactly what a parenting coordinator can and can't do within a case. And what's great about a parenting coordinator is that in theory, they get to know the parties, they get to know the kids. So you get to know, who's kind of pushing whose buttons, who's using what tactic, who's not using what tactic in a way that a judge can't get to know you on that kind of level. And not that parenting coordinators keep score, but you kind of get a sense of, who keeps winning, and why is that happening? And does that feel fair for the kids? And ultimately, parenting coordinators are usually given latitude to make decisions that then are binding. And the parents, if they disagree with that decision, there is a process where they can go to a court and say, I disagree with this decision that the parenting coordinator made, and here is why. But it also gives you, as a parenting coordinator, some level of authority to try to keep people out of court and to manage maybe smaller disputes and things more in real time. What I also like about being a parenting coordinator is that you're looking at a document that was put in place and you're trying to help people get through these impasses that they might have. So a perfect example might be something about like a sports tournament where it says, they're going to share the cost of what a soccer tournament and, they're going to participate on this team. But let's say then there's another team that comes up and let's say your child is so great that they were asked to play for this team. And this could open up doors for D1 scholarships and things like that. And one parent says, yes, he can participate. The other one says, no way, his grades are dropping, like this can't happen. And how can we kind of cut through that and figure out what's not only best for the kid, but also what's best for the family in accordance with what you previously agreed to.
So how long do you stay the parenting coordinator?
So usually most orders have an expiration of about a year or 2. Sometimes parenting coordinators are brought on for a shorter period of time, but you typically want to at least have an expiration with kind of the right for renewal because you don't want to be necessarily living in the background of this family forever. And you don't necessarily, there's sometimes I'll go months without talking to a family. And then there's other times where like there's, feels like popcorn issues coming up here, there, and everywhere. So it really depends on the family. And I also think too, that as a parenting coordinator, you also want to provide some skills for communicating where, someone might come out of the gate and just like, it needs a lesson. It's like, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And you kind of say, okay, well, instead of saying this, what if you tried framing it in this way where your spouse might be more responsive rather than feeling like they're being attacked? And, and sometimes it takes that third party to come in and try to say, that's not really what she's saying. Here is what she is saying, but she cannot communicate effectively with you so that you're hearing the message because it's getting all, jumbled in the emotion.
So are you ordered by a judge or are these parents hiring you at will?
Both. So you can agree to use a parenting coordinator, or in cases of high conflict, a judge does have authority to appoint a parenting coordinator as well. So it just depends on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's definitely in higher conflict cases, I've seen a lot of success with it. And even in lower conflict cases, you don't have to be at each other's throats just not to be able to, agree on something, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes it's just isolated issues that they need help with. Sometimes it's, the whole thing.
Well, it's nice when you have one party who might be a little narcissistic or aggressive, and you're the meek, mild, introverted type that doesn't want to speak up, but you really do have a great mind and you want to say this stuff, but you're afraid to. It'd
Right.
be great to initiate that service.
And it gives transparency too. You're having an open conversation with both parties, and luckily with Zoom, it's even easier to do where, I can get an email from one party saying like, this has come up. I forward that email to the other party, say like, what's your opinion? What's your take on it? And then let's schedule a call to kind of, shake it out and figure out how this is going to be resolved. And yes, there's sometimes things where I could say, okay, here's like a very good solution. Like, what do you think about this? And it's easy, 1, 2, 3. And then there's other times where I have to write, a lengthy letter or email saying, okay, heard what you said. I heard what you said. Here is, kind of like your options, and really lay it out. It really depends on, what the issue at play is.
Yeah, very good. It's a
Yeah.
lot of information today for everyone. So I'm sure if I had to summarize this, if you're listening, parent coordinators are a great option. If not appointed, which you would automatically get, it might be an option for you if you feel more comfortable having a third party, at least throughout the first year, to help you transition. But to the other takeaway for me is make sure you have this agreement in force. I mean, you need something to fall back on. You could be hunky-dory today and you guys are in divorce bliss and you're getting along great and you're going to do what's best for the kids, which we hope you are, but have an agreement to fall back on just so you don't end up back in the courtroom. And, if you have other questions for us, let us know. But Nicole, this has been a great conversation.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much again for having me. I really, truly enjoyed talking to you today.
Likewise. Nicole, how can our listeners and viewers learn more about you and your work?
Sure. So my law firm is Lindaberry, McCormick, Estabrook, and Cooper. Our website is lindaberry.com. And if you'd like to reach out to me directly, my email address is nkobis, and it's KOB as in boy, IS as in Sam, at Lindaberry, LINDABURY.com.
Excellent. So this concludes this episode, Parenting Plans and Finances, Building a Blueprint for Co-Parenting Success. Thank you again, Nicole, for a great conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of We Chat Divorce. We hope this episode was informative and supportive on your divorce journey. If you're looking for more support for navigating divorce with confidence and clarity, head over to mydivorcesolution.com for more podcast episodes, divorce events, and resources for your divorce. We'll see you back here for our next episode.